Welcome, welcome, brothers and sisters. I'd like to present you this information from this Urantia book. So that is why I do double reading today. And I start today with a new paper, which is paper 83. And this is all about the marriage as an institution. So the Mariage Institution. And in this paper, we learn also where all these rituals and ceremonies that we still are practicing in today's life, where in actuality their root is laid and how they came into existence. So let us see the sections that I will read through. Marriage as a societal institution, purchase and dowry, and we end with the wedding ceremony. Okay, let us start. And here is the screen share so everybody can read along with me. And it is, I think, about time that we get to know more about all the practices and ceremonies and rituals we are doing still that is involved with marriage. Okay, we are in the Urantia book, the third book in the Urantia book that is all about the history of Urantia. Paper 83, the Mariage Institution, and we go first through the introduction. This is the recital of the early beginnings of the institution of marriage. It has progressed steadily from the loose and promiscuous matings of the herd through many variations and adaptations, even to the appearance of those marriage standards, which eventually culminated in the realization of pair matings, the union of one man and one woman to establish a home of the highest social order. Marriage has been many times in jeopardy, and the marriage mores have drawn heavily on both property and religion for support. But the real influence which forever safeguards marriage and the resultant family is the simple and innate biologic fact that men and women positively will not live without each other, be they the most primitive savages or the most cultured mortals. It is because of the sex urge that selfish man is lured into making something better than an animal out of himself. The self-regarding and self-gratifying sex relationship entails the certain consequences of self-denial and ensures the assumption of altruistic duties and numerous race-benefiting home responsibilities. Herein has sex been the unrecognized and unsuspected civilizer of the savage, for this same sex impulse automatically and unerringly compels man to think and eventually leads him to love. Section 1. Marriage as a societal institution. Marriage is society's mechanism designed to regulate and control those many human relations which arise out of the physical fact of bisexuality. As such an institution, marriage functions in two directions. One, in the regulation of personal sex relations, and two, in the regulation of descent, inheritance, succession, and social order, this being its older and original function. The family which grows out of marriage is itself a stabilizer of the marriage institution together with the property mores. Other potent factors in marriage stability are pride, vanity, chivalry, duty, and religious convictions. But while marriages may be approved or disapproved on high, they are hardly made in heaven. The human family is a distinctly human institution, an evolutionary development. Marriage is an institution of society, not a department of the church. True religion should mightily influence it, but should not undertake exclusively to control and regulate it. Primitive marriage was primarily industrial, and even in modern times it is often a social or business affair. Through the influence of the mixture of the Andite stock and as a result of the mores of advancing civilization, marriage is slowly becoming mutual, romantic, parental, poetical, affectionate, ethical, and even idealistic. Selection and so-called romantic love, however, were at a minimum in primitive mating. During early times, husband and wife were not much together. They did not even eat together very often, but among the ancients, personal affection was not strongly linked to sex attraction. They became fond of one another largely because of living and working together. Section 2. The courtship and betrothal. Primitive marriages were always planned by the parents of the boy and girl. The transition stage between this custom and the times of free choosing was occupied by the marriage broker or professional matchmaker. These matchmakers were at first the barbers, later the priests. Marriage was originally a group affair, then a family matter. Only recently has it become an individual adventure. Coercion, not attraction, was the approach to primitive marriage. In early times, woman had no sex aloofness, only sex inferiority as inculcated by the Moors. As raiding preceded trading, so marriage by capture preceded marriage by contract. Some women would connive at capture in order to escape the domination of the older men of their tribe. They preferred to fall into the hands of men of their own age from another tribe. This pseudo elopement was the transition stage between capture by force and subsequent courtship by charming. An early type of wedding ceremony was the mimic flight, a sort of elopement rehearsal which was once a common practice. Later, mock capture became a part of the regular wedding ceremony. A modern girl's pretensions to resist capture, to be reticent toward marriage, are all relics of olden customs. The carrying of the bride over the threshold is reminiscent of a number of ancient practices, among others of the days of wife stealing. Woman was long denied full freedom of self-disposal in marriage, but the more intelligent women have always been able to circumvent this restriction by the clever exercise of their wits. Man has usually taken the lead in courtship, but not always. Women or woman sometimes formally as well as covertly initiates marriage. And as civilization has progressed, women have had an increasing part in all phases of courtship and marriage. Increasing love, romance, and personal selection in premarital courtship are an endite contribution to the world races. The relations between the sexes are evolving favorably. Many advancing peoples are gradually substituting somewhat idealized concepts of sex attraction for those older motives of utility and ownership. Sex impulse and feelings of affection are beginning to displace cold calculation in the choosing of life partners. The betrothal was originally equivalent to marriage, and among early peoples sex relations were conventional during the engagement. In recent times, religion has established a sex taboo on the period between betrothal and marriage. Section 3. Purchase and dowry. The ancients mistrusted love and promises. They thought that abiding unions must be guaranteed by some tangible security, property. For this reason, the purchase price of a wife was regarded as a forfeit or deposit, which the husband was doomed to lose in case of divorce or desertion. Once the purchase price of a bride had been paid, many tribes permitted the husband's brand to be burned upon her. Africans still buy their wives. A love wife or a white man's wife they compare to a cat because she costs nothing. The bride shows were occasions for dressing up and decorating daughters for public exhibition, with the idea of their bringing higher prices as wives, but they were not sold as animals. Among the later tribes, such a wife was not transferable. Neither was her purchase always just a cold-blooded money transaction. Service was equivalent to cash in the purchase of a wife. If an otherwise desirable man could not pay for his wife, he could be adopted as a son by the girl's father and then could marry. And if a poor man sought a wife and could not meet the price demanded by a grasping father, the elders would often bring pressure to bear upon the father, which would result in a modification of his demands, or else there might be an elopement. As civilization progressed, fathers did not like to appear to sell their daughters, and so while continuing to accept the bride purchase price, they initiated the custom of giving the pair valuable presents, which about initiated the purchase money, and upon the later discontinuance of payment for the bride, these presents became the bride's dowry. So now we know where this is stemming from. The idea of a dowry was to convey the impression of the bride's independence, to suggest far removal from the times of slave wives and property companions. A man could not divorce a dowered wife without paying back the dowry in full. Among some tribes, a mutual deposit was made with the parents of both bride and groom to be forfeited in case either deserted the other. In reality, a marriage bond during the period of transition from purchase to dowry, if the wife were purchased, the children belonged to the father. If not, they belonged to the wife's family. And then section 4, the last one for today, the wedding ceremony. The wedding ceremony grew out of the fact that marriage was originally a community affair, not just the culmination of a decision of two individuals. Mating was of group concern as well as a personal function. Magic, ritual, and ceremony surrounded the entire life of the ancients, and marriage was no exception. As civilization advanced, as marriage became more seriously regarded, the wedding ceremony became increasingly pretentious. Early marriage was a factor in property interests, even as it is today, and therefore required a legal ceremony, while the social status of subsequent children demanded the widest possible publicity. Primitive man had no records, therefore must the marriage ceremony be witnessed by many persons. At first, the wedding ceremony was more on the order of a betrothal and consisted only in public notification of intention of living together. Later, it consisted in formal eating together. Among some tribes, the parents simply took their daughter to the husband. In other cases, the only ceremony was the formal exchange of presents, after which the bride's father would present her to the groom. Among many Levantine peoples, it was the custom to dispense with all formality, marriage being consummated by sex relations. The red man, which we now call the Native Americans today, was the first to develop the more elaborate celebration of weddings. Childlessness was greatly dreaded, and since barrenness was attributed to spirit imaginations, efforts to ensure fecundity also led to the association of marriage with certain magical or religious ceremonials. And in this effort to ensure a happy and fertile marriage, many charms were employed. Even the astrologers were consulted to ascertain the birth stars of the contracting parties. At one time, the human sacrifice was a regular feature of all weddings among well-to-do people. Lucky days were sought out, Thursday being most favorably regarded, and weddings celebrated at the full of the moon were thought to be exceptionally fortunate. It was the custom of many Near Eastern peoples to throw grain upon the newlyweds. This was a magical rite which was supposed to ensure fecundity. Certain Oriental peoples used rice for this purpose. Fire and water were always considered the best means of resisting ghosts and evil spirits. Hence, altar fires and also lighted candles, as well as the baptismal sprinkling of holy water, were usually in evidence at weddings. For a long time it was customary to set a false wedding day and then suddenly postpone the event so as to put the ghosts and spirits off the track. The teasing of newlyweds and the pranks played upon honeymooners are all relics of those far distant days when it was thought best to appear miserable and ill at ease in the sight of the spirits so as to avoid arousing their envy. The wearing of the bridal veil is a relic of the times when it was considered necessary to disguise the bride so that ghosts might not recognize her, and also to hide her beauty from the gaze of the otherwise jealous and envious spirits. The bride's feet must never touch the ground just prior to the ceremony. Even in the 20th century and also in the 21st century, it is still the custom under the Christian Moors to stretch carpets from the carriage landing to the church altar. One of the most ancient forms of the wedding ceremony was to have a priest bless the wedding bed to ensure the fertility of the union. This was done long before any formal wedding ritual was established. During this period in the evolution of the marriage mores, the wedding guests were expected to file through the bedchamber at night, thus constituting legal witness to the consummation of marriage. The luck element that, in spite of all premarital tests, certain marriages turned out bad led primitive men to seek insurance protection against marriage failure, led him to go in quest of priests and magic. And this movement culminated directly in modern church weddings. But for a long time, marriage was generally recognized as consisting in the decisions of the contracting parents, later of the pair, while for the last 500 years, church and state have assumed jurisdiction and now presume to make pronouncements of marriage. And with this said, I have come to the end of reading the first 4 sections of this paper 83, that is all about the marriage institution, or marriage as an institution. The next time I will start at section 5, which is all about plural marriages. All right. All right, we have come to the end of reading this first part of this paper. It is an interesting paper as well as paper 2. These papers are very interesting to know and to learn more about the entire thing as marriage and how it is in actuality a very important pillar for society, for civilization, and so on. As last, I say thank you so much for listening and reading along with me. I wish you a beautiful, joyful day filled with a lot of love and wisdom and service to your fellow brothers and sisters, just as Jesus has taught us to do so. All right, I leave the stage